Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're super excited to share our summer update, our launch today. So I'm Abu Bakr from the Gradio team at Hugging Face. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of get things ready, and we'll get started in just a few seconds. Hello, everyone. Hey, we have folks from Japan joining us, from Spain. Wonderful. So good to see everyone. And yes, we'll get started in just a second here. All right. Yes. So welcome to the Gradio Python and JavaScript clients launch. Where, as I mentioned, we're very excited to see everyone here. And today we're going to cover four things in today's live stream. So we're going to talk about, first of all, why we're talking about the topic that we're talking about. Why are we talking about APIs and clients? Why is that an important topic for us as the Gradio development team, and for all of you as Gradio users? Then we'll go into the kind of the practical piece of how do you actually build a machine learning API with Gradio. And then we'll do a live demo, which is always a bit of a gamble, but we'll do a live demo. And then we should have some time towards the end for questions and answers. So with that, let's get started. So first of all, I think we're actually at a somewhat of a golden age or a historic moment in machine learning. If you think about who's actually using machine learning today versus who was using machine learning models and machine learning technologies that were being developed even just a decade ago. About a decade ago, it was almost entirely machine learning engineers or maybe software engineers. But now, really anyone who can use a GUI or a browser and has access to the internet can use state-of-the-art machine learning demos. That's actually super cool. Nowadays when a paper comes out, it almost always comes with a demo as well, right? So if you have a paper comes out on building consistent images, and just the same day or a few days later, either the paper authors, the kind of the machine learning researchers themselves, build a demo, or the community builds a demo and makes it available and accessible to anyone. A lot of that is powered, through Gradio, which we're very, very excited about. And there are more than 500,000 such machine learning demos on Hugging Face Spaces. I'm sure many of you all have used these demos or have built these demos yourselves. And if you have built these demos, maybe you know that building these machine learning demos used to be hard. So in the dark ages of building machine learning web apps and demos, you needed to know a lot of different languages and frameworks in order to just build a web application. So we used to talk a few years ago. We used to talk to people who wanted to build, and wanted to show off their machine learning models with a web application, and then they were like, "Oh wait, I have to learn Flask and Docker and JavaScript and CSS. You know what? I'm good. I'll just publish a paper and let somebody else figure it out." But now with Gradio, you can do all of that in Python, right? You can create the GUI that you want. You can define it in Python. Gradio automatically takes care of things like queuing, so you don't have to worry about what happens if this demo goes viral. It'll automatically be able to handle thousands of requests if it needs to be. Gradio also lets you host. You can either host your demo on Spaces, or you can create this temporary link just with a single parameter. It's a public link that lets anyone try out your demo. And so Gradio lets you do all of that in Python, and that's very much in line with our mission, which is giving Python developers superpowers that let them create these machine learning demos and applications and kind of increase the accessibility of machine learning as a field. As a result, we're very we're very honored, really, that almost 1 million developers are using Gradio each month. And actually, just yesterday, we crossed 30,000 stars on GitHub. But we're not satisfied with that. And one of the reasons we're not satisfied is when you look at how Gradio is used, oftentimes there's this tight connection between machine learning prototyping and Gradio, right? So Gradio is oftentimes used to build these machine learning prototypes. And when people deploy their web apps in production, sometimes they move away from Gradio or they use some other technology. And we set out to think and work with users to actually change this. So today, what we'll be talking about is not just using Gradio for prototypes, but also how do you use Gradio for production. So what I mean by production is, so for prototype, maybe you're working in a Jupyter notebook, or you're testing out a bunch of different models, and you spin up a quick Gradio GUI to kind of visualize and share your results. But we want to go from that to a production API. So an API that you yourself or other software developers who may not know anything about machine learning can use in their products. So the goal that we set for ourselves is, what is the fastest way to go from a prototype to a production API that anyone can use? And you can use it within your software, and you can use it, as your software scales with many different users and things like that. So as we thought about this, one of the challenge we thought about, why is it so hard to actually do this right now? Why are ML machine learning APIs so difficult? And part of the reason is because there's different steps that are involved in building a machine learning API, right? So the first step is you might prototype with some sort of machine learning tool or library. You might be using a Hugging Face, transformers library. You might be using something else like PyTorch or scikit-learn. You might be running things locally with things like Llama CPP or outlines. Then at that point, once you're kind of ready, once you've prototyped, and by the way, prototyping is super important in machine learning, right? Because, unlike typical software engineering, there's a lot of different hyperparameters that you have to try, and sometimes the connection between the hyperparameters and your final piece of software, sometimes that can be a little bit opaque. And so prototyping is very, very important, right? And so right now, Gradio is already used for that. But once you've prototyped, then you have to think about containerizing and deploying your model on scalable infrastructure. Once you've done that, you're still not done, because you now have to think about the end users of your API. So you have to write a documentation. You have to build downstream clients that can consume your API. You have to make sure this documentation is always up to date. And then finally, you might be interested in monitoring the API usage. You want to know, how many people are using the API. You might want to know what percentage of requests are coming through. What does the latency look like? Things like that. And not only do you need to know various frameworks in order to do all of this, but all of these frameworks might be in different languages, right? And so the goal that that we set out is it possible to do all of this with just a single framework, Gradio, in a single library, Python, or in a single language, Python? And the reason I think this is especially important is because, although it's possible to do this separately with various different packages and so on, it is quite time consuming, and this is problematic because oftentimes after you've deployed a machine learning app, if you've ever deployed one, you're not done. You're almost never done. You have to sometimes go back to the prototyping stage, and this happens for various reasons. Maybe your data distribution changes. Maybe a new model comes out and you want to try, let me see if Llama 3 works. I built my product on top of Llama 2. Does it still work with Llama 3, or do I need to change different, hyperparameters, things like that? And so oftentimes we're kind of doing this dance between, okay, we've deployed something, but hey, I want to go back to prototyping. Okay, now I've changed some stuff. I want to deploy that again, and so on. So there's kind of this, back and forth that always happens. And so if we can make this process super fast, then you can iterate faster. You can try out, what is the actual kind of best thing that we can do here. So with that, I want to transition into how Gradio is actually solving this problem. And first of all, I'll just start with some basics. If you've built a Gradio app before, you know that every Gradio app is already an API, and as we'll show, it's actually also a production ready API. At the bottom of every Gradio app is this link here in the footer, use via API. And if you click on it, you'll actually see that every function in your Gradio app is documented, right? So here, if I go back, I have a text box, a slider, and it generates an image. This is a very, very simple Gradio app, but even if you have many different endpoints, many different functions that are happening here, you'll see all of those endpoints documented by automatically when you click this use via API link. And so everything is documented. The parameters are documented. The payload types are documented, whether they're required or whether there's a sensible default that is automatically generated. All of that is kind of documented here as well, along with the return statements as well, along with a payload. So example payload, which is sometimes, which is what we've heard from developers as this is really important. I want to be able to copy and paste an example query automatically, and then just modify it based on the payload that I want to kind of use in my application. When it comes to infrastructure, you can deploy Gradio apps anywhere, but Gradio apps naturally work with Hugging Face spaces. So I'm sure y'all are familiar with this, but you can just drop your Gradio code inside Hugging Face spaces. It automatically builds and gets deployed, and then you can choose whatever hardware you want. And you can choose, when I say scalable, what I mean by scalable is oftentimes, your GPU load varies, and you don't want to there might be times where your kind of load spikes, and there might be extended hours where nobody is calling the endpoint, and so you don't want the GPU to be running the whole time. So Spaces lets you very, very easily control the sleep time and things like that, so you only have to pay for however much GPU you're actually using. And even that we're hoping to reduce. So one of the things that we just launched recently is zero GPU. So it's this ability for you to actually run GPU loads without paying anything. And this is powered by something that we built called Zero GPU, which lets you share GPU across different users. And so Zero GPU works very, very nicely with the client. And we'll talk. I won't talk about that too much right now, but if people have questions, we can maybe talk about that towards the end. But yeah, so Hugging Face Space is a very natural place to deploy your Gradio application and then use it, consume it via the client. But of course, you can deploy it anywhere, including your own server or infrastructure. Okay, with that, I'd like to actually transition over to my colleague Ali Abid, who'll be talking about more things that we've built, including some very, very recently, in order to make it easier to use Gradio as an API. So I'll just bring on Ali here.
Thanks, Abubakar. So if you're working with APIs, one of the things that you're going to have to run into is documentation. And the two frustrating points about documentation is that someone has to write documentation and someone has to read documentation. And so we solved that by just having no documentation. And so what we introduced instead is, even though there is some documentation, what you can do to get around that is use the API recorder, which instead of making you rely on the documentation, you can just use your UI interactions and have Gradio record them. And as you're interacting with the app, it records your interactions and the API, the client API calls that you would need to make those exact interactions. So now you can just click, enter your input, click submit, click whatever interactions you want, and you can see the client API calls you would need to make those exact interactions. So no more wrangling with documentation anymore. This makes it much easier to go from your UI to your client script that you need to make those same API calls. Additionally, we make it very easy to manage the queuing, managing heavier or like high traffic with very simple parameters. So imagine your app goes viral and you have hundreds of requests coming in. We manage a queue for you for all the requests that are coming in. And there are two arguments really that you need to just configure to manage your queue. The first one is the concurrency limit, which is basically the number of workers that will be processing this function at any time. So if you have, like, let's say an image generation function and you have 3 GPUs available to you, then you could set that concurrency limit to 3 to let the Gradio know, don't run, have 3 workers working on this function. And that's how you can control how many workers are working on a function. The other argument that you have available to you is concurrency ID, which in case there are some functions that can share workers, they can have the same concurrency ID. So let's say you have 2 GPUs and you have a couple different functions that all use GPU. You could give them all the same concurrency ID and set the concurrency to limit to 2, so that Gradio knows, all right, between my 2 workers, or between all these functions, we'll have 2 workers assigned to handle all of these functions. And in that way, you can control the flow of your queue based on the resources that you have. Another thing that we've been working on is just making sure that we are adding no or almost no overhead to your request. So when you make a request to Gradio, there's obviously the network traffic, and there is the processing time for your function, for the code that you have written, whether that's like image generation or text generation, whatever it is. That is something that can be changed. But Gradio is obviously also doing a little bit of work, processing the inputs, processing the outputs, returning that to the front end. And we wanted to make that as minimal as possible. And so one of the tests that we do is that we serve 100 requests being served by 100 workers concurrently that are streaming text. And we want to see how much overhead are we adding to the requests. And we've been working on eliminating this overhead as much as possible. So now we've almost decreased our overhead by 75% over the last few releases, which should make it almost negligible using Gradio to serve your APIs. An example of a heavy or a very popular use case is the Chat LM app, which is one of the most popular apps that use Gradio that basically provides two chat bots or two LLMs responding to your request. And basically compares the responses and creates an ELO ranking of all the models based on this. They serve, I think, 50,000 users a day. They serve 400,000 streaming requests per day, and it's all done with Gradio. And they don't have to worry about any of the scaling costs or anything like that. They just provide the resources, and Gradio will handle the resources through the queue or through the workers that are assigned to them. And so this is just one example of like a very heavy workload that is able to use Gradio entirely to handle their production use case.
Ali, do they need to do any sort of like any extra optimizations on the server, or are they just serving a Gradio application?
So they do have replicas that they do specifically for just because there's so many requests coming in. And so they do create replicas, and that's pretty easy to do with Gradio. We have guides on how to create replicas and serve Gradio across machine replicas. But it was very easy for them to get that up and running with Gradio as well.
Sweet.
Lastly, the last thing you want to do is if you're using Gradio for a production use case is to see your traffic. You want to see, how many requests are coming in, how long they're taking, how many are successful, if they're failing, what's failing. And so what we've added is an API dashboard that comes with every single Gradio app now. So all you have to do is go to your app/monitoring, and this monitors all your requests that are coming in, whether they're coming from the UI or from an API request. You can see all the usage, monitor all the traffic and all the usage that's coming in for your app, which is something very important if you're using your Gradio as your production backend. And so now you have control over that to see how it's being used, and you can make your decisions for your API based on that.
Do you need to do anything specific to enable this, or does every Gradio app have this?
So this will actually come with every single Gradio app. So it's ready to go as soon as you start running. It is something that's only available to the app creator. So not everybody, if you make a public Gradio app, it's not like everybody can see your analytics. It's only the creator who gets the URL for this analytics dashboard. And the way you do it is basically you go to your URL/monitoring, and then it'll provide you this. If you are the creator of the app, it provides in the console the link to the actual dashboard. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to Freddie now, who's going to talk about.
Hi, everyone. I'm Freddie. Super happy that you guys are all here. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about the Gradio client. So Abu Bakr and Ali, really motivated how Gradio can serve a production use case, and it can be used to power like a production endpoint. So now that that stage has been set, like how do you actually use Gradio as a API production endpoint? And the answer is with the client libraries. So and over the next couple of slides, we'll talk about the design philosophy of the clients, and like the three main pillars that we followed when implementing the clients are that they're ergonomic. So the API is very easy to use. Like the whole API reference, it's like about 50 lines of code basically. They're transparent in the sense that anything you can do with the Gradio UI, you can do with the client. So you could basically recreate Gradio in another language if you wanted to. And they're also portable, so you could run them anywhere, especially for the JavaScript use cases. Anywhere that you could run JavaScript, you could connect to Gradio and get predictions. Next slide, please. All right, so to talk a little bit about the API's ergonomic design, first I want to talk about like an example application. So this is like a Gradio chat interface. Hopefully you've seen this before. If you haven't, it's like a one-line way to create a streaming chatbot. So as you can see here, we ask this model programming questions. Here I'm asking it how to do a for loop in Python, and then it's able to stream the response. Okay, so next slide. Now I'm going to show you like the code needed to connect to that application, right? So, the first step, just install the client, pip install Gradio client, and then you import this client class from the Gradio client library. And one thing I should say is that the Gradio client comes with Gradio already. So if you're already using Gradio, you don't have to install anything else. And then, we can connect to our server. In this case, I'm connecting it using this space ID syntax because I'm hosting it on Hugging Face Spaces. But if you're hosting it on your own infrastructure, just put the publicly accessible URL. And then, in order to get a prediction, you just call the predict just call the predict method. And then the only two things you need to pass in are the keyword arguments. So they'll match the function signature of the deployed space. So if you're the app creator, it's really easy to map the client code to what the Gradio app is using. And you can also get all this information from the View API page or the API recorder. And then you just print the prediction. That's all it takes. And then streaming is also really easy. In Gradio, if you're used to streaming in Gradio, you know that you should be writing for loops. It's the same thing with the client. If you're trying to stream, write a for loop, submit a request, and then just iterate over the results and print them or do whatever you want with them. So that's how it looks like in Python. And then in JavaScript, it's very similar. My colleague Hannah, who will be talking shortly, and Pete, who will talk at the end, have done a lot of work to redesign the client so that it matches the Python API as much as possible. To get started, you just install the client library and then you just await this connection method. And then you just call predict. This is basically the same thing, and then the same for loop syntax also works. We'll cover that in a second. So that's how the sort of the ergonomic design of the client. And now I'll hand it over to Hannah to talk about the other two principles.
Thank you, Freddie. So here's an example of how you can log into a Gradio space with basic authentication enabled. You can connect to any space now just by passing the credentials to when you're connecting the app. This is quite a recent addition as well, so anybody who's been using the client before and has been waiting for this, you can go ahead and try it yourself now. Here's an example in Python using cancel. So you've also got a lot of power over what happens in the queue, as Ali Abed was talking about earlier. Here's an example of how you do that with the Python client. So when running a prediction, you can choose to cancel a job that has been queued as long as it hasn't already started. So if it has started, then it won't be canceled, but the client will no longer listen for updates. The View API. So here's an example of where you'd inspect the API of a simple Hello World app on Gradio. This is on Hugging Face Spaces at the moment. So you can see the configured endpoints for a space as well as their respective parameters and data types that you need to pass in and the data they're going to get back from the endpoint. When you're not sure about how to use a space, that's how you can access it, as well as the use via API page that Abu Bakr mentioned earlier. Another example is the queue position.
Sorry, just a quick question, Hannah. So this example is in JavaScript, but you can do the same thing in Python as well?
Yes, you absolutely can. It's also using View API as well, so the same syntax too. The queue position. So here's how to get information about a job via the status event. This returns an iterable, which is really valuable, has really invaluable information about what's going on behind the scenes. So this example is checking the position of a job in the queue, but you can also see other data like the stage it's currently in, the queue size, and the ECA of the job completion as well. So you've got a lot of information there that you can feed back to the user in your app, which is very helpful. Another really powerful method that we've included is duplicate. So you can use any public space that you see, anywhere that's has a Gradio space embedded, and anywhere on Hugging Face as well, as an API. But there are times you might get rate limited if you make too many requests, for example. You also can't always rely on the owner of the space to have it constantly running, and it might be stopped, or there might be an error or something, and you might need to change that. But you really want to use whatever's going on in this space. And also other restrictions around this might be the hardware that they're using. You might want to use a different GPU, for example. And a solution to this is to duplicate the space. It's pretty much the same as Connect, but has all of the same parameters plus a few more. And this will be duplicated under your own Hugging Face account. So that's why we ask you to provide the Hugging Face token. And you also can declare whether it be private, so it can be a public space or a private space. And what else can you do? You can make it, you can change the hardware, as I said, as well, which is great. And you can also set the timeout of it. So this is the value in minutes that before the space will go to sleep after an inactivity. So this is also great for developers who might not be super familiar with the Python library. I'm not much of a backend developer, so this is great, for example, for me, if I wanted to build a really cool product around a great space that I've seen. So yeah, it allows me to, or anyone, to leverage a space that they found. As long as the space is available and works, then there are very few reasons why you might ever actually need to write any Python. And next, so another really cool thing about what we've been working on is making this as portable as possible and compatible with many platforms. So as part of the improvements that we've made, one of our priorities is to make sure it is usable anywhere. So whether you want to make a mobile app, a web app, a desktop app, and if you're using Deno, you can use Svelte, Node.js, React, React Native, Cloudflare workers, you're able to use a Gradio Space API. Another example of this happening is Hugging Chat. So this is currently available for anyone to use right now. It's Hugging Chat tools. So this means that there's a really cool tools feature at the moment, which queries Gradio spaces from within the chat, and it leverages all of this functionality from different spaces to produce more interesting outputs, for example. So here in this one, as you can see, there are certain tools that the Hugging Chat is using. The document parser, the image generation, and the image editing in that tools list are all Hugging Face spaces that you can just use right now and access. So this is a really great example of how you can use the client for yourself. And another really good example of the Gradio client being used, the JS client, is actually the core Gradio library itself. So we actually use it internally to build our Gradio app. So in theory, anyone could use the client to replicate a lot of what the core Gradio library actually does. And as a result, we're constantly testing and improving it ourselves. And yeah, so that's the Gradio client. And beyond that, we've also had users requesting programmatic access outside to Gradio apps outside of Python and JavaScript environments. We've just added support for direct requests through curl, which is brand new, which means you can only access you can also access from bash scripts, but in theory, any language, since curl can be easily ported to various languages. So that's really exciting. And in this slide, you can also see, if you want to see the example usage of this, you can use it. You can see it by the Use via API button in any Gradio space. So yeah, going ahead, we're really excited to partner with the community and create community-supported clients in any other language like Rust, Go, and Swift. And yeah, I'll hand over to Pete now for a demo.
All right, Pete.
Hey, thanks. Can you share my screen as well? Perfect. Ooh, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, thanks a lot, Hannah. So I'm going to try and walk through now a little example of how you might use the clients. Now, I, like everybody else, love the Gradio UI, but I've got my own kind of brand. So I want to kind of use the clients in my own website that I've set up with my beautiful penguin wallpaper. And so to do that, I'm going to use the API. So what we're going to build here is we're going to build a little joke generator using everyone's favorite large language model. So one of the things that I kind of want to try and get across is the kind of workflow that using Gradio and then using Gradio directly, including the UI, and then kind of gradually migrating to the API when you want to kind of build an MVP or even go to production, and why that kind of workflow has value. So obviously there's an enormous amount of models on the hub, over 1 million or something, same for spaces and stuff. But one of the nice things is that when you are kind of, you can search through trending and stuff. One of the nice things is being able to kind of look at a space. So an example of this is this chatbot I've got running here. So this is Llama 3 70B instruct. So a pretty good model. In this demo, we're running it via the inference API. So I want a joke generator. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see what's been written. So I'm going to ask to write a joke about a penguin. And here we go. Why did the penguin join a rock band? To be the lead flipper, which is exactly what we're looking for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump across, and obviously we can play around with this. We can dial the temperature right up. Let's see what it does. Yep, as expected. So we'll probably want to keep the temperature where it is. But this is the kind of the nice thing is there are lots of parameters. There are lots of things you can play with models. You know, large language models, there aren't too many parameters. There are quite a few, and some of them can have a significant impact on the kind of output you're going to get. With other kinds of models, and text-to-image models come to mind here, there are lots of parameters, there are lots of things that you can play with, and there's a huge variety of results that you're going to get. And having a nice UI that you can just mess around with to try and see exactly how you want to set things up, what values you want to set the parameters to, you know, what kind of, in the case of language models, you know, do you want to play around with different system prompts? This is a really nice way to do it. And then when you're happy with your results, you can just jump across and start using it as an API. So we're going to jump across here to the JavaScript, and we can kind of copy in here. So that's a chat interface so that we get this kind of like nice chat demo. So we're going to take our little kind of joke app, and we're going to write a little bit of code. So what we've got here is we've got a little application that I've already set up. I'll just very quickly walk through it. It's a Svelte kit application, and we basically just have 2 pages. We've got this kind of main page, which is tell me a joke. And we have a kind of a judge page, which we'll look at later, and that's going to judge our jokes. So we can go into this this joke component to actually get our joke. And all we're going to do is we're basically going to take that we're going to take the joke prompt from earlier. So I have tweaked this one a little bit. I'm just going to pop it in here. I'm going to pop it in here. And here you can see this is the space URL. So we just pop in the space URL. This is a public space, so we don't need to authenticate. We just call client.connect as expected. And we kind of pass in the prompt. And the prompt here is just tell me a short joke featuring a penguin. Tell only the joke. Obviously, you've got to go through the usual trickery to try and get the language model to do what you want it to do. We give it some values. I give it a max tokens here that's quite short, just a pretty average temperature value and top p value. And then we're just going to kind of run this. So we go back to our application. We should. There we go. We got our joke. So why did the penguin join a band? Because he wanted to be in a flock band. One slight issue is this. It does just keep giving me the same joke over and over again. I guess I need to give it the whole history for it to do a little bit better there. But we are getting a joke, which is cool. And another thing that I think it would be cool to do here is I'd quite like an image for my jokes of. So if we go back to my browser, I found this. This is a pretty recent image model. It's really good, actually. And again, you know, we can play around with it. We've got all these different kind of things we can play with. This model is called Mobius by Cosel.io, and we can just try out this space here. So I've duplicated this space so that I don't have a queue. So I kind of found the original space. You can see the original space is here. And I just kind of went to, I went here and I duplicated the space and I just created a space here. And you can assign whatever hardware you want. And I set this to a private space. Where's it gone? Where's it gone? So, and as you can see, the results are pretty nice, like they're pretty high quality. There's a cartoon of a boy playing with a tiger. Pretty cute. And so what we're going to do is I've prepared a little illustration that I wanted to illustrate for me. And this is just a little scene with some penguins in it. So it just says, in the illustration, a group of penguins stand apprehensively on the ice floe. I generated this with a language model as well. Peering across the ocean towards a distant, vague outline of the UK, the penguins, with comically frightened expressions, look back and forth between the silhouette and a large, playful depiction of a whale peeking out of the water nearby. So that's what we are working with. And we're going to create a 3D animation with a silly, playful joke, and hopefully it'll give us something something reasonable. It's not bad. That's not bad. And you know, we could play around with the guidance. I think if we turn, and again, it's the same story. You know, you can kind of play around with these ideas. You can tweak the model to your liking, and you can see what kind of results you get. You obviously have got negative prompts here. We're using a random seed here. If we turn this right up the guidance scale, let's see what impact that has. And this is this kind of, you know, this is what makes Gradio valuable. You know, whether you're oh, that's interesting. Maybe we'll drop that back down. You know, whether you are a kind of, you know, you're building demos that you want to share, you're actually kind of like building your own machine learning models that you want to share, whether you're a seasoned Python engineer, you know, you've got all of the queuing system and a bunch of other kind of nice features, or even if you're a front-end engineer, and, you know, obviously Gradio is a UI tool, so it doesn't seem immediately obvious that that it would be useful to, you know, front-end engineers or full-stack engineers. But again, this idea that you can just play around with things, prototype with them, embed them straight in your application to build MVPs, to get buy-in from stakeholders, to, you know, to scale things up. And even, to be honest, you can stay with Gradio until like you're at quite a high scale. Obviously, if you're serving millions of users, you know, you might want to do something more custom at that point. So that's too much. So we're going to do this here. So we're going to go back to our demo, and we've got a little joke image thing here, and we are just going to kind of run this. Obviously, ideally, what it'd be nice to kind of get a description of the actual joke itself, and that's that, you know, that's something that you could do. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader to expand this demo to include the actual joke somehow in the image. You'll notice here we're connecting to a private space. So this is a private space. You can see here it's private. No one else can access this. I don't want them using my expensive GPU that I don't pay for. So I've kind of set I'm not going to show you my API key, but it is a very finely scoped token. We have finely scoped tokens on the hub now. You should use them wherever possible. And I've popped this in an env file down here. And that's git ignored, so that will never get committed. And then we just pass it in here. And then the result, we want to get the result, and the result is it's the source will be equal to, I think it's actually this. So let's see how I'm getting along in my little app. So that should run, I think. And there we go. We've got AI generated penguins in our kind of like joke generator. And so now we've seen now that we can use a private space, we can use a public space, all hosted. So just for reference, the first space that I used was a chatbot that was running using the inference API. So we're using the inference clients in Python here. There's you can use it in JavaScript as well. In the Mobius app is not like that at all. The Mobius app is using is using diffusers, and it's doing on-device inference, hence why I gave it a nice GPU. And it's still not too much code. It's more code, but it's not too bad. But what I want to show is, as well, you can also use local demos as well. So I've got a demo running here. I'll zoom this in. There we go. Ignore the fact that it says ingredient. I may have reused this demo from another demo, but I'll show you the app we've got here. I don't want to go into too much detail again. It's incredibly tiny. Let me zoom in. So what we've got here is we're actually using kind of like Llama CPP. So we're running this model locally on my laptop. And one of the big benefits of Gradio is how close it is. Well, the fact that it is part of the Python ecosystem. If you want to use the latest kind of cutting edge kind of technologies and libraries, you really need to be in the Python ecosystem, or you need a way to access the Python ecosystem. There's certainly been, a lot of development in other languages, but it's kind of very difficult to get around the fact that everything comes to Python first. That is where the machine learning community is. So being close to that ecosystem, or having access to that ecosystem, is, in my opinion, really, really important if you want to experiment with the latest and greatest tools. So here, we're using Llama CPP, which runs, and we're using it via Llama CPP Python, which is Python bindings to Llama CPP. And we are loading probably my favorite local models used, which is Mixtral 8x7b instruct. It's a really nice model. And we're actually going to use it with outlines. So what the role of this chatbot is, I'll show you what it does first, if I can find. So I can't type. So the role of this chatbot is to tell us if our joke is funny or not. So by the way, it seems to think an awful lot of things are funny when I tested this. So if we take this joke, why did the penguin join a band? Because he wanted to be in a flock band. That is funny. It's objectively funny. Let's see if Mixtral agrees. Doesn't agree. Well, that's upsetting. But if we put something nonsensical, we just put because of the cheese. Doesn't think that's funny either. What is cheese? I'm not sure this thinks any. Oh, it thinks that's funny. That's a funny joke. So if you are considering a career in stand-up, maybe you want to pay attention to this. But anyway, the efficacy aside, let's see how to integrate it into applications. So what you'll notice here is we've got a large language model, and it is giving us funny or not funny. And that's a very difficult thing to do if all you're doing is prompting it. But we're using a library called outlines. And you can Outlines is a fantastic library that it basically helps you to generate kind of structured output from a language model. There are integrations for Llama CPP. There are integrations for transformers, for XLlama v2, VLLM, Mamba SSM. So it's a bunch of different integrations. And what it allows you to do is to constrain the output of the language model. So in our code, we're using a little API called choice. So we load the model in using Llama CPP, like so. And then we store the model like this. And then we create a generator. And then in this generator, we've basically used this choice API. There are other APIs where you can pass for example, a pedantic data model in, or you can pass a regular expression in, and you can use that as a kind of a constraint to kind of guide the output of the language model. But in this case, we're just using funny or not funny. And this could obviously be, it could be any kind of set of literals in this way. It could be, red, blue, and green, or, so on and so forth. And what we basically do is we just kind of use the generator here. So we're just passing our message. We're just doing something very basic. We should be using some kind of a chat template here, really. But we're just concatenating the system message and then our actual message. So in the system message, we're telling it to analyze the joke, and in the message, it is the joke. And then, but the generator will constrain it to one of these values, funny or not funny. And that way we can guarantee that we get those kinds of, get the correct results. Because if we wanted to kind of use this in, to pass it to another API, use it in a programmatic way, if you wanted to do things like tool calling and stuff, having structured output is critically important. Having guaranteed structured output is incredibly powerful. Now, you can't get this if you're not in Python. You can't get this if you're using kind of, random APIs. I know some providers do provide some support for constrained output, but being this close to the metal, the way Outlines works, it needs to be really close to the model. It needs to have access to the different kind of like layers of that kind of LLM inference process. So being in Python is key. So even, if you're comfortable with APIs, you're happy with APIs, there's a whole world of experimentation that's available if you dive into the Python ecosystem as well. So that aside, let's jump into, let's go to we've got a little page here, which we can, is my joke funny? The rendering is kind of very strange here because I somewhat ran out of time. But what we're going to do is we're going to hook this up. So we've got our, and essentially the same thing is true. So if I go back, to the demo here, there's a use via API thing again, and it just shows your local host. So again, a great way to experiment without kind of like running up a massive bill is to use local models, use quantized models with Llama CPP. And I'm going to basically just copy this, except I'm going to copy one that's already got some information filled in. So we'll jump back into here. We'll go into our judge, which again, it's very same. It's very, it's a similar setup. We're basically saying, is that really? That's not what we want. What we want is, if I can get out of this menu, we want this prompt. So I'm going to take this prompt. We're going to pop it into here. We're going to save that. And I think that's probably it. Let's go find out. So, is my joke funny? Let me go and get a joke. Flat band, obviously. Same joke again and again. Oh, is it funny? It's funny. It's funny. It's funny now. It wasn't funny before, but it's funny now. So as you can see, my application, my joke generator needs a little bit more work. Hopefully we'll put this up on GitHub so people can kind of take a look along with all of the demos and stuff and links in the README on how to run it and how to replicate this. And hopefully someone can make it a lot better than it is at the minute. So hopefully that kind of explains something that might approach a workflow that you might kind of enjoy when working with various models. I think part of the challenge is not just kind of building demos and stuff, but is exploring the ecosystem, is exploring kind of, which model is best for which task. And, by kind of looking through and, looking at your different tasks and the different libraries, looking at what's trending and what's kind of like popular, you can really kind of start to get a feel for, and then being able to kind of go in and look at spaces that are using things and experiment with them and duplicate them and try them in your own applications. And whether you're working locally, whether you're working with kind of private spaces or with public spaces, hopefully this has kind of demonstrated like how you might go about that and what that might look like. So thanks. I think back to you, Abubakar.
Thanks so much, Pete, for those live demos. So with Pete's demos, you saw an example of Gradio running a machine learning model that's running via the Hugging Face inference API. You saw one example where it's running on Space's hardware itself, and then one example where it's running locally. So hopefully that kind of demonstrates, all of the different possibilities, and there's more of where the model can be running, and then how you can use the client in different applications. So with that, I will go back to the slide real quickly and just recap. So to recap this presentation, I think hopefully everyone has seen that Gradio now lets you go from prototype to production really fast. Out of the box, as soon as you build a Gradio application, you get automatic documentation, you get an API recorder that lets users interact with with the UI and then reconstruct that interaction in code. And you also get API monitoring as well. So today we also announced the first major release of the Python and JavaScript clients, the 1.0 release. So take a look. The changelog is up on GitHub as well as on the Gradio website. So we've tried to make the JavaScript and Python client very ergonomic, very easy to use, and then again, transparent, and then also super portable. You can run it anywhere where you can run Python or JavaScript. And there's been questions about this as well in the chat. But yeah, you can also directly access it with curl or other libraries like requests as well. And the clients, as we mentioned, as Hannah mentioned, they're already being used in production. They're being used in Hugging Chat and in other places. And we're very, very excited for you to try them and let us know what other kinds of things that you would like to see in the clients. We're actively working on them. And I would love for you to share your feedback with us. And with that, thank you so much for your attention. If you have questions about usage, the clients are up on our website on the docs. I have a link in the bottom left. And it looks like we have like maybe 6-7 minutes for questions as well. So if there's any questions that we have not answered yet in the chat, feel free to ask them now. And myself or one of the team members are happy to answer them. Thank you so much for joining. All right, so we have a couple of questions. So one question is, what would be the use case for not using Gradio? In which case, should you simply use a kind of build your own web development framework? So it's a good question. Hopefully, I think what we've shown is there's lots and lots of reasons to use Gradio. There's lots of benefits that you get, and out of the box. One of the things we haven't really talked too much about is when you build a Gradio application, it's not just the UI, it's not just like what you can see in front of you, but there's an entire backend. There's a queuing system that actually we did mention a little bit. Ali Abid touched upon this. That can handle large volumes of requests, and the queues are very, very easy to manage as well. So lots of reasons why you might want to use Gradio. When should you simply use a kind of standard web development framework yourself? Maybe in very custom use cases, if you're scaling to millions and millions of users, and every there's lots of optimizations you want to do, which you cannot do in Gradio, you might want to do that. It used to be that some of the cases where people would switch away from Gradio would be things related to customization and styling. So for example, you might want to make your UI look very different. We now support themes, so that's not really a kind of use case anymore. It used to be sometimes when you want to build a very custom component, you would switch away from Gradio, but now we support the idea of custom components. So you can actually you can bundle a little bit of Python and JavaScript and create a component that works within Gradio, and it even works within the API. So it'll the clients will work with it and all of that good stuff. So there's a few more questions here. So some feedback on the docs. That's great. For that kind of feedback, you're welcome to create an issue on our website as well, on our GitHub repo as well, and we're happy to answer it there. So we had a answer there. Let's see here. Question about Python code for the examples. Yes, Pete, are you planning on sharing the Python code or I think the code for your examples anywhere? I'll add you back to the stage.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. There will be we'll create a repo, I think, with some examples, and we'll put both the kind of the front end app and all of the local example, as well as maybe links to the spaces that we used in this demo. So you should be able to replicate the whole thing, and we'll try and get a hosted version of the app as well. Obviously, we'll improve it a little bit, but yeah, we'll watch Twitter, I guess, for an announcement on where that is.
Yeah, awesome. And our Twitter, let me just go ahead and add that here live as well. So if we do a lot of announcements on Twitter. So Twitter is probably the go-to place if you'd like to stay up to date. So I'll add our Twitter handle here as well. It's just @Gradio. Okay, great. So we have a comment here that someone built an education app using Gradio with more than 1,000 students. That's awesome. Okay, sweet. If there's any other questions, we have a couple more minutes for questions. If not, that's fine as well. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We're super excited to have you all try the Gradio clients as well as use Gradio in production. And we're here if you have any more questions. We're here on Twitter. We also have a Discord, an active Discord server. So feel free to find us. Thank you so much, everyone. All right.